Really?
Yeah. All right. I think we should be live now. Here we go. Here come people.
Yeah. There are folks joining, so we'll give them a few minutes to assemble. Then we'll get started in a couple of minutes. Is it warm up in the Bay Area or cold right now? It's freezing.
It's cold,
here.
man. It got below freezing last night again.
Wow. It's been getting below freezing in Northern California.
Yeah. It took out a good third of our plants outside. It's chilly. I mean, I complain, and all the people on the East Coast are like, really? This is what the issue is? Hey, everybody, we're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. Thanks so much for joining us. Sorry, Emad, I don't know if that's your job to.
No,
you're
my co-host.
Minus 20. See, now we can't complain about the weather.
Exactly. All right, and we got several folks who are joining. All right, why don't we start to kick things off? Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar where we're gonna learn the secrets of customer lifetime value from Google's Chief Measurement Strategist, Neil Hoyne. We've hosted him before at Retina on one of our webinars, and really always happy to have him back, and very excited to rehost him today. For those who don't know Neil, so Neil is a little bit of everything. He's an analyst, researcher, inventor, lecturer, and in his own words, he's mentioned father of many forgettable slides. I don't believe that. Every time I've chatted with him, it's been a very insightful, deep conversation on everything from marketing analytics to customer analysis and how to value customers. Very interesting background. I've also been in conversations with him on a lot of strategies around how Google and evolution of Google ads and how customer measurement has been happening. But without me butchering all this, one of the most interesting things about Neil's background is he's done this for a long time. He's done more than 2,500 engagements with some of the world's biggest advertisers, and some of these efforts have helped many of these companies and millions of customers improve their conversion rates by more than 4x. But Neil, maybe I'll pass it to you. Maybe you can give a couple of.
I appreciate that, Emad. No, I'm happy to. You can keep going if you want, because if people generally ask me, they're like, "What's Neil?" I'm like, I like modest expectations. As you know, I like people to come in and be like, "Yeah, so Neil's just a guy we found that happened to talk about lifetime value." But more practically, by label, everything that Emad said is true. I've spent more than a decade working in this space with customer lifetime value, the privilege of working with some of the top companies, some of the top platform partners, some of the top academics. And the biggest question that I struggle with is not, can strategies like lifetime value make a lot of money, but where do companies see success and failure with it? That's kind of the guiding question of my career, is when you see two companies that are given the same information, why do they do different things with it? And what do we learn from that? And we'll talk a lot about that today, Emad, as you know, and I'll give everybody kind of an early preview about what we're going to be talking about, is that it often is just from the leadership side, which means that all of you are empowered to make these changes in your organization, more so than some companies say, no, we need to capture more data. We really find that it's just leadership, and it's a perspective as to how they look at these challenges.
Yeah, I'm so on point. And I want to give a quick introduction about myself and Retina as well. So my name is Emad Hasan, for those who might not know me. My passion, I also very aligned with the career passion that you have. For me, I've seen this story before at PayPal and Facebook on how customers are being treated as a big blob of like one big average cohort, and certainly that's been an issue that I got to see brings in a ton of inefficiency in many businesses. So given that background, I got to see that for most companies, about 30 to 50% of their customer base tends to be lifetime unprofitable. And that really became a calling cry for me. I was like, look, we've managed businesses at the total aggregate level for the last several hundred years. What could we do to change that around and look at customer profitability at the individual customer level? and try to make each customer profitable. And obviously that spans anywhere from customer acquisition and making sure you're spending the right amount of money for each customer you're acquiring, to customer retention, when you give out promotions, making sure that those promotions are limited by the expected value of that customer. And when customers reach out to us, making sure there's some level of prioritization that's happening, that's not just first come, first serve, but you're also factoring in the fact that some of these customers are worth more and others may not be the same. So that's been my life's calling in terms of the career I've taken with Retina, and that's a lot of what we do. And we'll jump a lot into the discussion today. A lot of the discussion today, I'll probe a few things about the overlap between what Neil is seeing and he's shared in his book and what we're seeing here at Retina as well. But let's get started. I'm gonna start with sharing how we typically run these webinars. So these hopefully are slightly different than other webinars you've attended. We really love a lot of audience participation. So we'll divide up the webinar into 3 major sections, which is how Neil's book is divided into, is conversation, relationships, and then getting started with improvement inside your organization. And each one of these, we'd love for the audience to participate. As you participate and ask questions, that's how this webinar becomes really useful to you. So each section will start off with core concepts around that particular section. We'll tease out some concepts, and we're really looking forward to the participation from audience. Make sure you're using the Q&A section or even the panelist chat section to throw out your questions out there, and we'll be sure to answer those. So instead of waiting till the very end for Q&A, let's make that more of a conversational thing here while we do the webinar. And what we'll try to do is make sure that we spend no more than 10 minutes on each section. We'll get through all of the sections, and then we'll also leave some room for Q&A. The other thing that's happening is this is a very special webinar. Since Neil just published this book, we are going to give away some of these books. Unfortunately, we can only give away some limited amounts, so we'll talk a little bit about that, how you're going to get to know about that by the end of the webinar as well. So we'll cover that by the end. With that, let's get started, Neil. Without further ado, I want to hear more about let's get into it.
Let's get into it. All right. And by the way, you'll notice the book is also behind my shoulder. I found that this is, I guess, what you're supposed to do when you write a book is obnoxiously put it in every video conference that you do from that point forward. But a little bit of context. Where did this come from? A little bit more than 2 years ago. And this is already 8 or 9 years into my journey about customer lifetime value. The need started to arise where a lot of people were asking me and saying, look, I have literally had the pleasure of working with thousands of companies on this. And people just said, well, the first question was, how do we learn these insights? What are companies doing right? What are companies doing wrong? And part of the bias really came from the fact that when you look at a lot of these case studies that are published, they only talk about successes, right? They only talk about a company did this and it just instantly worked as soon as they decided they were going to do it. And they said, yes, we're going to climb the CLV mountain. And they just first attempt, they made it. And I wanted to write something that was really practical. And the reason is that these types of transitions, if we call them transformations, are difficult. And it's easier to be honest with people to say, these are the challenges that all companies face that they may not admit. And that was actually the starting point, was a collection of essays to see when companies are going down this path, what were stories that companies actually faced? What were the challenges? How did they overcome them? So as you're making these transformations for your own businesses, you're leading them through these problems, you have these lessons to pull from, and you also have the expectations that it's coming. So that was goal number 1. Goal number 2 was to be able to build something that could create a foundation across your company of almost a common language. So to say that you didn't need to start from scratch teaching and reteaching everyone's lesson, because everybody truly needs to be involved in this. But then how do you educate them? How do you bring them on board, not simply to follow, but to be partners in this change for your business? And that was really the challenge. Now, the second one was a lot harder. And this is something I'll admit, people don't like to read data books. I don't even like to read data books, and I do this for a living. But it's hard. You get an hour at the end of the day, and it's to say, hey, you got TV, you have family. I got 2 toddlers in the room next door. Or you read a data book, and a data book is going to be a distant third. And that's because I only listed 3 things, but it's probably at the bottom of the list. And so the approach of the book was to build something that was very conversational. And if you pick it up, even the first chapter, you'll see very much an extension of this discussion that we're having here today. And the idea was deliberate, so that not only could you learn and enjoy it, but you could hand it, even if you just tear out and give individual chapters to other people in your company to say, you need to learn this. We need to correct this problem. We need to figure out this strategy. It's not going to be like pulling teeth, like giving them a corporate white paper. It's something that hopefully they will enjoy, they will share, and it will become something that they embrace. And so that's been the entire process. Nearly 2 years of writing it. Finally came out on Tuesday, and also in audiobook format if you don't get tired of listening to my voice.
Well, I will highly recommend it.
Yeah, you're an audiobook guy, Emad. I know.
Yeah, but I read this one.
Like, you did actually read the physical copy. You got an early version.
I listen and read a lot of these, and I'll tell you guys why I liked it is the conversational tone. Second thing is you've already done a lot of it's very clear we read a lot of data books because you've included enough data points here that it makes somebody who like me, who's very data driven, be excited to read it.
I did add the footnotes, everybody. They are in there just in case you're like, where did you get this from? It's like, if you really want it, it's in there.
And then the last thing that jumped out at me was the non-obvious insights. There are, whenever I read some of these books about marketing or analytics, a lot of it is fairly obvious, like most people are already doing it. But what you've done is you've included so many nuggets and chapters and lessons on non-obvious insights. And that's what I'm excited about today, because all of these marks you've seen, bookmarks you've seen, I've basically marked up a few of these really interesting non-obvious insights. And I'm hoping that we can cover that with the audience today and hear about your experience, and then
let's do it. Let's do it. That's gonna be fun. Go ahead.
All right, let's get started with the book, and I'm gonna see if I can tee you up for this section. So there's two things I want to do. I want to kick off a poll, which if I can figure out how this Zoom thing works on the poll, I might ask my co-host helper Kristen to help me launch the poll. But while we do that, why don't you give us a little bit of a preview into the first section of the book, which you call Conversations? Yes. What is Conversations all about?
Oh, and the poll is up too. All right, so as everybody's reading the poll, how do you gather customer insights? Let's talk about this first section, Conversations. You'll see a theme throughout the book, which is it's a lot easier to pull on things we know, human relationships, and apply them to digital than it is to try to get people invested in metrics and KPIs, which are almost inhuman. They separate us from those actual people. And so the very first chapter was like, look, and I go in on this hard, Emad, as you know, early on in the book, talking about how a lot of marketing today, the short-term marketing is all about what we want as marketers, not necessarily where the customer may be. And the analogy I use, which unfortunately I carry forward, some may say beat to death over the course of the book, is that idea of going up to someone almost in a bar and immediately proposing. Because you may look at it and say, well, look, proposing is what I want to do because I want to get married. And so everything else is in my way. I want to know, is this person going to marry me? If not, I'm going to move on. I will propose to thousands of people, and eventually somebody will say, yes, this is modern digital marketing. And so this entire first chapter is really just, first section is saying, let's take a step back. Let's treat people as a conversation. Let's treat people how we would want to be treated as a consumer. And what skills do companies need to build in that area that will make sure that not only can they carry that conversation forward, but they start to build that relationship with that customer?
That makes a ton of sense. Let's jump into a few of the things that I thought were really interesting. One was one of the first things you include here is asking questions. And the reason I thought this was interesting is we work with companies on building lifetime value models, and there's a very clear swath of companies that ask a lot of questions, and sometimes they'll even include them in onboarding. And obviously product people don't love more onboarding questions because that increases friction. But you shared insights. Again, this is the kind of non-obvious insights that I was seeing all over the book, which was that for a company, and there's a study included where a retailer included a positive question during the onboarding.
Oh, yeah,
and
that one.
Increased. Yeah, and their spending went up 8%. And it's like, this is amazing.
Let's talk about that one because it's a lot of fun. And by the way, I was looking at the poll results about the people that run post-purchase surveys. Let me take a step back. Let me tell you, what are we talking about with asking questions? Generally, data collection is relegated to a large enterprise effort for most businesses. right?
Yeah.
We're going to run a massive survey. We're going to build a new integration with a third-party data set. It needs to be more nimble. It needs to be more responsive. Best time to ask customers questions to capture data is actually on the thank you page, the confirmation page after purchase. That's when trust has been found to be highest with the consumer. They just gave you their money.
Yeah.
So we're not reducing people. People aren't dropping out of the funnel by doing it on the initial page when they're just signing up and trying to get to buy their product. We're doing it right after. We're not waiting weeks or months. And you just think about this as a consumer going through your daily life. How many companies aren't doing that? How many companies are just asking what they need to know to fulfill the order? They're not trying to learn more about your wants and needs. And there's a lot of opportunity there. The thing that Emad was talking about was they actually found a number of surveys that even we can improve the way that we ask questions to consumers. So if you have that survey, what are you likely asking? Generally, two types of questions. One is the negative, what can we do better? The other one is the neutral. Was your experience good? Was it bad? Tell us on a scale. And we just kind of aggregate that information up. An interesting insight that was found in the research was that most consumers don't necessarily form opinions until they're asked. So if you're on a call with someone that says, hey, wait for the feedback survey, they start paying attention. You ask them in that survey, what was something we could have done better? They start thinking about ways that you fell short of their expectations. And so some researchers thought about that and they said, well, if that's the case, what happens if we take that 10-question survey and we add a question on the top and we say, what was something you like about our products? What was something you like about our brand, about our company? What if we just ask them that question, get them to think about the positives that we contributed before everything else? And Emad told you what happened on the retail side. They saw lifetime value went up nearly 8% over the next year from those customers. The other tier of customers, when they looked at B2B, people that had a trial product of software, 60-day period for that trial, 30 days through, they said, hey, what do you like about your trial thus far? They found an increase of more than 30% of people that went from trial to becoming actual paid subscribers later. And even financial services, to show how ridiculously powerful this was, they looked at customers more than a year later. And for the customers that received that positive question, they had not only higher lifetime value, they had higher customer satisfaction, they used more of the bank's products and services, and they had higher deposit balances. And the only thing that made them different was that they had this question. And so there's really two things that I push for in the book. Number one is these insights are everywhere. If you just pay attention and you become a little bit more nimble as to how you're engaging and asking these questions of your customers. And the second is that a variety of companies miss them because, and this ties to the larger theme of the day, they're only looking at short-term value. That retailer, 8% lifetime value over the course of the year. If you were just measuring that to say, well, did these people that got the positive question, did they buy right away? The answer would be no. And so when we start to take a look at this lifetime value, this relationship lens, what we're generally seeing is more opportunities come forward to us. Sorry, Emad, I know there was a larger answer and I'll let you get to your next question. I'm excited about these types of research points.
Look, this goes into the exact thing you're talking about. So one of the things that we get often get asked, like, what are the key factors that impact customers' lifetime value? And one of the interesting things that comes up is if somebody's buying a gift, we go to the extent of like looking at shipping and billing address differences to try to understand if somebody is buying a gift, because we know that has a huge impact. And one of, again, a study that you shared here is that where somebody who was buying a gift ended up spending 63% more, and their purchase frequency was 25% higher. I was like blown away by that. I was like, wow, this is amazing. So
and it's strange, right? Gift buying. Let me give you the larger picture. I'm ruining part of the book for you, but there's plenty of stuff in there. Generally, people that buy gifts for other people, buying a gift for someone. Emad, if I buy you a gift, that is a reflection of self. That's a reflection of your taste. And as it turns out, people that buy gifts for other people end up then, because of their association with the brand and the company, buying more themselves going forward into the future. And so what do we learn from this? The question to ask, are you buying this as a gift? And that insight, especially on new customer acquisition, can be a valuable signal to say, these are more customers we want to acquire. There's also that secondary benefit, is to say a lot of people focus on gifts during the holiday season, November, December, every year. One of the recommendations from the researchers was to say, hey, you know what? you should do this all year round. You really should find different ways to integrate and offer your products as gifts because it provides not only that signal, but also that lift. And Emad, hopefully it's okay. I see a question came in actually from Ryan as we were talking about the LTV lift to say, well, people who respond positively to those questions, are they already high LTV customers? Is there a cause and effect? Is there a correlation between it? The research itself, and we will find a way to publish this after the webinar, it's also in the book, is that it actually found that at different stages of surveying customers, lift increased. So simply asking the question, even if they didn't respond, they saw a slight bump in the relationship. Then customers that responded went up a little bit higher. Then customers who received and responded to the positive question went up the furthest. So I'm not sure if that teases out the correlation causality behind it. But what they did find was they simply found asking people more of these questions changed the relationship that you had with them.
Yeah, I didn't actually read the paper, but when I look at these studies, I make the basic assumption of that they did a test and control and actually tested for.
Yeah, the professors generally are more rigorous. Like most of the experiments I do, they're like, we can do better. Yeah, we'll send all the research to you. It's great. If you're a little bit eager, the paper is called Mere Measurement Plus, MERE Measurement Plus. You can find it. Just toss it into Google. You'll see it right away.
One of the other topics I had that was actually related to this, I'm going to just skip to that one, is how do you decipher what impact customer conversations and what the customer value? And it's very clear that, and you're talking about in the book that this is where you can take advantage of machine learning examples. One of the things that when we looked at machine learning examples, we ran into this issue of causality versus correlation enough times that we saw that the deeper way to do this is this new tool called causal inference. And I shouldn't say tool because it's like an open source package. So anybody who with a data science team probably can go run an iteration of this. But causal inference is, given the fact that you have a lot of historical data and you're not looking to do forward-looking tests, that might be one way to do it. But is there any other basic ways people can get started around this on how to decipher impact of customer conversions and value?
This is just a change in perspective. And again, when we talk about successful companies versus less successful companies, the less successful companies plot it out and they say, and you've seen this, here is our customer journey. This is what we want our customers to do. What we see be more successful is taking that data and saying, this is just what the customers are doing. What can we learn at specific points where everything is on the table? And I'll give you 2 examples to make that real. One that we talk about in the book is simply how when people interact with products, when they're on the product detail page, they're providing information. Now we're focused. We want to get them to click add to cart, buy now. But then we're overlooking a signal, which is depending on how people interact with the products. You know how they zoom into products, they rotate them in 3D. These interactions and these features actually contribute to the overall happiness they have with the product. The more they can get a sense of the texture and the size and the construction of a product, it actually shows correlation to reducing return rates. And so we actually see, even though these features are important to say, look, we can drive everybody to the shopping cart, but what we really want to see is who are the customers that are going to be happy and keep the products, because returns, especially in retail, they get expensive. The second thing we talk about when we just talk about signals is we tend to look at people, again, this traditional view of a customer funnel, adding to a shopping cart. That's important because now you're getting serious. That's when the remarketing starts. Well, here's 2 insights from it. Number one is remarketing to people directly after they add something to a shopping cart. I'm talking about the next 24 to 48 hours actually decreases the likelihood that they'll convert. Keeping that personal relationship, stalking somebody and calling them up on their phone all the time to be like, hey, we met yesterday, I'm going to call you 4 times. That's what remarketing ads can be. And it actually decreases the likelihood to buy as opposed to waiting 3 or 4 days and intervening. The second part is, instead of adding to the shopping cart, also most of the data supports people that remove things from the shopping cart are closer. Now it seems odd, removing, they're getting further away from the purchase. Are they? Removing is an act of curation. It takes nothing for them to abandon your site altogether. But there's certain actions like removing things from a shopping cart to say, I'm getting closer to purchasing. I have to start making a decision. Adding to cart, it's just a holding area. Removing says, hey, I'm getting closer to buying and we want to pay attention to it. But the larger lesson for all of you is really that thing is to say, if you can understand what the customers are giving you and you're paying attention to what those individual actions mean, a lot more of the features and functionality you have on your website will tell you more about what the customers are planning to do and when you should intervene.
What's interesting about this is that what you just suggested, like these type of correlations at the least exist everywhere. So at the least, anyone can do is once you have a sense of who your valuable customers are, you can look at these correlations on your BI tool fairly easily. You start seeing which direction to move into. We have two.
And I will tell you on that, it just takes somebody to tell other people to do it. There's too many companies that are like, well, how many people added something to a cart and how many purchased, and they have the percentage drop off. Really, the thing here is just to challenge that model.
Yeah. Let's answer these couple of questions and move on to the next section. I'm already realizing we're behind the schedule. But let's start with how do you determine the time period to calculate lifetime value for auto? Would that be 10 years? Yeah, so generally, like, should you calculate a full lifetime value or a truncated lifetime value? This is a little bit of an advanced topic for customer level lifetime value modeling, but I think your intuition is right, which is inter-transaction times. What is the typical inter-transaction times really determines. So when we did this work with backcountry.com, we use very long time horizons because people have this buying behavior, seasonal buying behavior. Some people come back every 2 years, some people come back every year, and some people come back every 3 months. Whereas when you're working with, let's say, a video gaming company, which people are logging back into the app every couple of hours, sometimes your finite lifetime horizon that you pick can be much, much shorter. Yep. The next one, I think you can take, Neil. Is the gift impact hold true if you're in a subscription business and the gift is a one-time purchase? That
is an interesting question. I haven't tested it. I'll tell you where my hypothesis is on it, is that with subscription businesses, we're seeing over time more and more subscription businesses are behaving like non-subscription businesses because the barriers to sign up, the barriers to cancel. And I think traditionally of entertainment options, right? I'll sign up to Netflix when there's a series I want to watch, then I will cancel until the next season comes on. We're seeing those behaviors take hold in subscription businesses where they relate. In terms of one-time subscriptions, what I would expect based on the data, and again, I haven't tested this, is that the person who's buying the subscription for somebody else would in fact have a higher lifetime value in the future. So people buying as opposed to individual subscribers just signing up for themselves. So if you just split and segment the customers and say people buying for themselves, people buying as a gift for others, you'll likely see that differentiation.
Yeah. And one thing that I'll say about this is that the important thing is that signal should be used. Which way it impacts may change depending on the business and use case. But for sure, like that's an important signal that better be going into your modeling.
Yep.
All right, there's one more question, and it seems a little bit more of a technical question. Usually CLV is more defined for subscription-based models, but in retail, where transactions are really fragmented, what is the best way? Customer migration and modeling are some ways, but what could be the other? Okay, so really interesting question. I'll answer this, and then Neil, would love for you to chime in. First of all, subscription businesses, what we looked at is how the academics define subscription businesses is it's as if when a customer decides they're going to hit the unsubscribe button, they're never going to come back. What we see is subscription businesses are often not as subscription looking as they look to be. People will come back and use the unsubscribe button as pausing behavior all the time. So there's really, and then when you look at non-subscription businesses, there are people who are coming back on very regular purchasing cadence. So what we found is in real life, businesses are somewhere in between. There's no such thing as very few subscription businesses are purely subscription with like one-time churn that the customer never comes back, and very few totally transactional businesses are such that where people are not coming back on a regular cadence, which means that you can't just expect to use hey, I'm going to use my VG NBD for one type of a model and my Pareto NBD for the other type of a model. You really ought to build the model, test the accuracy and the distribution of predictions, and make sure that it addresses the need of the business, and then iterate on the model parameters or even the modeling technique if need be to address it. That's what we've generally seen. So I'll pause here and Neil, pass it to you if you.
I'll just add some thoughts for the uninitiated here. There's always that question: well, why do more subscription-based businesses do lifetime value than non-subscription? The answer is twofold. One is subscriptions don't make sense if you only look at a customer's value for 1 month or 1 year, for instance. The other reason is that it's a lot easier to figure out when customers leave because of that assumption. If you cancel, you're gone forever. And we now know that's a pretty, as Emad said, that's a pretty strong assumption to make. But that's what telcos often would say. This is what the subscription entertainment companies would use. And so that was why you see a lot of adoption in those areas. What we're now seeing is that it's a little bit more complicated. Now, that's not to say that lifetime value is out of reach if you're a subscription company or if you're a non-subscription where you think these behaviors are harder. The models that he was referencing, when we talk about these Pareto models, these BG-NBD models, what we're talking about here is that there's a standard toolkit that informs a lot of our work. And these are tools and models that have been proven for 20 or 30 years. And all you really need is an expert to kind of guide you along in the process. But it shouldn't be intimidating just because some of these words are new. It rather should be, it's very familiar. It's just you need a knowledgeable guide to say, hey, here's some of the pitfalls and here's some of the things you should look out for, but we can still do this together.
Yeah. Why don't we address this question in the next section? I'm going to be cognizant of time, and I think it is actually very relevant to the next section as we talk about that. I'm going to pull up the next section, which is about relationships. So Neil, why don't you describe a little bit about what this section is about? And in the meantime, can we set up our next poll, Kristen, if you're listening?
So let's get into the relationship section. The first chapter, the first section where we talk about conversations, that's the real foundational stuff. It's almost eating vegetables, which is to say, hey, we need to collect the right data. We need to think of these as more than short-term transactions. Now you get into that question to say, how do you scale it? And I want to be clear about what I mean when I talk about scaling, because Silicon Valley has a weird definition of it. It's not going out and just reaching thousands of customers and having this understanding for tens of thousands or millions of people. It's really having the same understanding that you could have in a one-to-one relationship, but moving it to a one-to-many without compromising. And so a lot of the section is to say, all right, now that we have this understanding of these conversations and these longer term behaviors, let's talk about how we really put it into practice in terms of making decisions differently as an organization.
Yeah, let's jump into it. The first thing you mentioned is, and I actually want you to extend on this, don't treat every customer the same.
This is that relationship portion that I talked about. And this is, again, where I stretched a little bit too far. I'm sorry, please don't hate me because of it, but it helps. It's simply saying that when you look at your own life, different people have different levels of meaning. You're going to have your friends, you're going to have your family members, your partners, your close colleagues. And then you're going to have the Uber driver that brought you back from the airport, a fantastic person, I'm sure. They did their job, but you're never going to see them again. And the reason why this understanding is so important and why I use just this very casual language, one is we all understand it. But the two is that when we think about it, who do we want to focus on? Who do we want to listen to? Who's going to provide the most value in our life? It really starts to feel a little bit silly if you say everybody. Like if I was asking an opinion on my career, I would go to my family. I would go to my wife. I'm not sure I should trust them. I mean, maybe the Uber driver has great advice, but I wouldn't weigh it the same amount. I don't want to turn down advice. I don't want to turn down people. And this is really one of those foundational understandings, again, that a lot of companies are recognizing, to say everybody isn't the same. We're not turning people away, but we're just understanding where that relationship is, where that value is, and we're kind of making decisions accordingly.
I thought this was a really interesting chapter because as I was reading that, it reminded me of this like really strange activity I do, which is so I don't do this for my personal relationships, but for my work relationships, my calendar is a good representation of how many people who I've met for how long. And I'll usually export out my calendar in a way where I can put it into a lifetime value model and see which people I meet who are one and dones in my career and who are folks I've been meeting with over and over again. Obviously, Neil's value is extremely high because we have this really good, we meet on enough interregular time that our LTV suggests that we're going to do this for a long time. So appreciative of that. Let's talk a little bit about So we talked about this component. Let's talk about common mistakes when understanding customer value. So, we do this with companies, but you've done this with 2,500 different engagements. So I want to hear your take on what are some of the interesting things you've seen go wrong.
I'll give you my rapid fire stuff, and this is why I have a lot of scotch directly to my right off screen. A few things that I listen to. First of all, some companies saying the average lifetime value. So looking at all their customers as being equal, saying, hey, we're taking that step to look at relationships, but we're assuming that relationship plays out the same way for everybody. And that's usually kind of a code word for me to say, there's a problem here. If they're like, well, what have you done with lifetime value? We know our lifetime value is $300 for everybody. And that means generally that you overspend on a lot of customers that aren't worth it, and you underspend on the customers and relationships that are worth the most. That's number one. Number two is oftentimes companies will feel compelled to almost fit their entire business to lifetime value. Say, we're going to change everything at once. That's the plan. And what we generally find as a best practice is, actually, it's not the case. Your business has already been successful doing what you're doing. What this represents is the next level of growth. And that process for getting to growth is often gradual, and it's personal for that company. How do we keep all the great things that you've been doing? And one by one, how do we fit LTV into your business versus the other way around? And the third part, and this is just something I bring up because I think it's just a little bit silly on there, is that sometimes when people are acquiring new customers, they have this sense of optimism that any customer they acquire can be turned into a great customer. And that really does two things. One is it means that they go out and they acquire a whole bunch of cheap customers, thinking that once they see our products and our services, they will be hooked. That's exactly what these lifetime value models are built to prevent, by being able to tell you early on if they're going to spend a lot, and they're accurate, which means that the second part of that comes up to say we acquire a whole bunch of really poor customers, and then we spend a lot of money trying to develop them and turn them into better ones. And again, tying this back to that theme that's been carrying through on this discussion and in the book, this idea of personal relationships, it's like meeting somebody that it's not going to work, but for whatever reason, you convince yourself that with enough time and enough effort, you can change them. And it might be true, but a lot of people see a lot of heartache doing it. A lot of companies see a lot of heartache doing it. And you're just better off finding those people that are a better fit. And so those are just some of the, certainly a lot more that we could mention, but those I think are some of the most prevalent ones that we see in companies today.
I think it'd be interesting. I just see a question here that is very relevant to this topic. So let's answer this one. So let's go with this question, which is idea of CLV was primarily cultivated to find out who the customers are and what their potential is. But what about incrementality, right? And should we be considering incrementality of lifetime value? So I thought that was very interesting because certainly a topic we've done a lot of thinking around. We worked with Measured, who is a partner on incrementality measurement. So there's two components of it that we get to see, which is incrementality of the next customer you're acquiring, and that's in the acquisition use case. And then there's incrementality of your retention campaigns and what increases the LTV of a customer. And obviously there's you could move some customers to a higher LTV, but as Neil said, the best form of customer retention is getting a good customer to begin with, acquiring a good customer. But what are your thoughts about this, Neil?
No, I think you're exactly right. I think if we look at incrementality just with lifetime value or customers or marketing in a large bucket, it's harder to pull out. But instead, we really talk about three things you can do. You can meet better people, in which case you're looking at the incrementality. Are we able, through our marketing interactions in one case, able to improve the types of customers that we receive today versus a previous day? Second one is development. For the customers where we have their lifetime value, can we increase it? And the most common answer there is you can't really change the goodness of the customer, but there is an opportunity to upsell customers at the right time. So during a checkout process, to get a little bit more money out of them, or to develop new products and services that weren't previously calculated in lifetime value. So that's the second bucket. And then the third bucket is retention. Emad, you touched on this one. Can we get people to stay around a little bit longer, but doing it in a profitable way? Not we need to keep all customers at all costs, but to say, here's a customer that's veering off the path. And in those cases, when you think about incrementality in those three buckets, it's pretty straightforward. Were we able to bring in better customers with this particular investment or intervention? Were we able to keep more customers in this test group versus customers that naturally left our business? That's how we look at it. And that's kind of the breakdown that helps into Emad's thing. There's certainly acquisitions going to help more than any other bucket, but you really can look at it across all three.
Yeah, thank you. Let's there's a question here that's specifically for you. I think this is also
I see it. Hello, Neil. Time. Yes.
Yeah. Why don't we answer that one? Why don't you repeat the question and then
sure. And here's the first question: is speaking about digital measurement, collecting data, privacy, first-party data. Business starts seeing big challenges in identifying new, even old clients, or better targeting them across devices and channels. Are there better tips for activating your data, or what the future of data activation looks like? I think there's a lot coming in this area, because just with privacy, there's a lot more concern to say, well, how should we be treating customers and their data? Yeah. I think the answer will be solved in the form of trust. There was a great Salesforce survey that came out that said that nearly 80% of customers actually wanted to share more data with companies. In an era of privacy, think about that for a moment. They want to share more data, but they just want a different deal. They want that relationship with that company. They want to know that they can trust that company. They want to know what the company is going to do with their data. They want to know that they can revoke those permissions. And so companies are really saying, when we talk about these relationships, they're even more important in that question, because it allows people to say, well, look, you really need to build that trust and treat those people like people and not commodities, not simply saying, well, here's unique visitor 1, 2, 3. Let's see how much data we can get from them and how much we can sell that data for. And you can do that if you're looking short term, but if you want that relationship, that's what will start to answer that question. The second one, kind of whimsical. What keeps me staying in the field? I'll say this. Because of where the market is right now, there is so much opportunity for everyone. You don't have to get this right. Remember, more than 90% of the market today is on short-term, non-relationship transactions, which means anything you do, anything you take away from this conversation, from this book, that helps move you in that direction, even if it's not perfect, is going to lead to growth. And that's a great place to be. We're not in hyper optimization mode where we have to get everything right. We're in those early stages to say, now is a point where we're seeing more companies move towards this, more companies having the data, the motivation to do this. And that's what makes it really exciting.
I have so much more to ask you about this on this one because of the big news that also came out, but let's keep this going because we have a lot more to cover. And I'm going to skip ahead a couple of points that I don't know if we'll have time to cover. So let's jump into actionability of customer value, because this one, we're looking at the results of the poll. So enough companies are thinking about customer, and just even based on the results here, looks like folks are calculating customer lifetime value with one modeling or the other. What do you do with it? That's the next question that jumped out at me. And one of the things that there's a question over here that I wanted to hold off till this conversation. I thought chapter 9
there it is. Yes, really the picture from the book. Yes.
Yeah, where once you have the customer level lifetime value modeling, you can start to cut the data and start to group and aggregate the data in a way that you can start to see which channels are working, what type of LTV is working. Do you want to talk a little bit more about this?
Let's carry forward that intuition with everyone. The very first part that we talked about was who is valuable, right? So now you're looking at all your customers, all the people in your business's lives, and you're saying, these are the people that matter and these are the people that don't, based on how much value they're bringing to me. Next question is going to be why. Why are they valuable? And so this is where it becomes an iterative process. The very first step was calculating lifetime value. The next step is adding on dimensions to kind of explain that picture. And what's great about this process is iterative, right? So you don't need to load in every piece of customer data you possibly have. You can, but you can do something simple. And in this example, I give a simple one to say, look, let's take all our customers. Here's their lifetime value. And let's ask ourselves, where were they acquired? And in this case, we may see, and this is just an example here, but maybe in this example that, customers acquired, say, from paid search or from video are going to be worth a lot more than what that initial transaction suggests. And so where some companies may back off and say, hey, the transactions coming in from paid search are only $80 to us. It's terrible. Let's cut back on paid search. The long-term value of those customers, of that relationship, is significant. And what happens is every dimension that we bring up, everything that you add to this picture, whether it's were they acquired on a mobile app or not, where do they live, what products did they buy, it gives you a signal that you can then use for targeting people. Now, I'm going to ruin your surprise, but I saw your deck earlier, so I have to do it. how this ties in together is to say, well, okay, well, how do I activate on this? What do I do? And that's kind of why I'm here talking with Emad and Retina, is because they've actually started building some of these pipes, if you will, to connect all the pieces. There we go.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in here because this is what gets me excited about doing custom. So for the almost 52% of folks attendees who've shared that you're doing customer level lifetime value modeling, this is what gets me excited. So if you can do customer level lifetime value modeling, you can do a lot with it. So imagine taking that data and taking each individual customer's LTV score and sending it back into Facebook or Google. And in this case, Google, we just launched a product this quarter where we are feeding the LTVs back into Google. And I'm also simultaneously answering this anonymous attendee question, which is around optimizing for LTV. So all of a sudden, you can not only take LTV values and feed it back into your ads manager. And once you do that, you have two things that happen. Number one, transparency. You can go down to the ad creative level and look at which ad creative and combination is bringing you the highest value customer, not just the cheapest customer. And in addition to that, what I'm very excited about is you can then turn on custom conversion or custom conversion value optimization, which then you can let the algorithm that Google has find the best audience. And I think that's where this interesting era of privacy to first party data to then LTV modeling is headed, just to answer the question. And Neil, chime in if you.
I love it. This is a way this becomes real. Right? It goes from being this theoretical concept of imagine if we could do lifetime value to now saying we now are building a roadmap to do it. And so it just goes back, right? We started with that very basic idea. Let's understand and make sure we're asking the right questions. We're learning about our customers. We're moving to a longer term view. Then we go into let's calculate the lifetime value. And now we're talking about what are the levers that we can pull to make it actionable. And everyone represents an opportunity, especially this type of integration.
All right, why don't we pause for a second and start to think about section 3. And as we do that, let's launch our last poll. I know we're running way over time.
I will go quickly through this. What is self-improvement? Look, it's just the reality that even if you have the right plan, the right roadmap, there are other people, there are other functions at your company. And so a lot of people came to me, they said, look, individually, I get this. But how do I convince other people? How should I look at things like, we talked about incrementality with lifetime value. How do I look at it? How do I navigate these ideas of getting people on board with these new concepts, knowing that in transformation, sometimes there's winners and losers. And we could talk about these things. We can talk about it for hours, but that's what you're going to find really in this third section, is to say that it's not enough to go into any company and say, we're going to let the data decide, or we're going to show that lifetime value is a superior metric. It's simply saying, here are some of the best practices through hundreds and thousands of companies as to how they brought others along on that journey. Emad, is there anything specific you want to cover? I know there's a whole bunch of bullet points. I'm aware of the time. I want to give more time for Q&A.
Yeah, no, I think
we can talk about.
Let's talk a little bit about this. So I'll start with the quote at the bottom, right? Like when early days of Retina, one of the big things that I saw this quote somewhere, and we haven't figured out who actually said this. So it's an anonymous quote at the moment, where half of the money I spend on advertising is wasted. I don't know which half. With customer level lifetime value modeling, you can actually tell your exec team exactly which half. You can go down to the customer ID level and say, here are my low value customers, here are my medium value customers, here are my high value customers. The fact that you can do this and you can put on a chart and show, here are my 30% or X% of customer base that are lifetime unprofitable. Why is it that still large organizations are not making huge change? How do they not just react to it? And I think there you talked about this in the chapter where the cost of inaction for large organizations. Maybe walk us through that a little bit.
I will give you the story. And first of all, a lot of people, if you're going to respond in the Q&A, be like, I know who said that quote is from Wanamaker. The publishers actually made me go through it. They're like, oh, you said it's from Wanamaker. I was like, yeah, you type it into Google, look how many times. And they're like, tell me where the original attribution was. And I spent a non-trivial amount of time trying to find it. I found plenty of books that said he said it. Nobody can actually go. I think the reference was in the 1960s. I think there's a book by Ogilvy. It was like, and this is what Wanamaker said, but nobody can find it. So they wouldn't let me put it in. Instead, I had to put a paragraph explaining what Emad just gave you. But what's the story? How do we bring other people? This is just one of the little tidbits. I'll ruin it for you, but here it is. The first time I presented lifetime value, I built it as a complete story. Here's what the data says. Here's who your valuable customers are. Here's what you do next. It made sense, and nobody was interested in doing it. Because they looked and they said, so what you're going to move us from is short term, where we get to see all the results right away, to something long term where we have to trust you. And that sounds, for companies that are always skeptical about marketing accountability and the true ROI of their investments, especially CFOs, that's a hard transition to make. To think that someone comes in and says, look, now don't have to look at my performance today. Trust me that not only a month, but a lifetime with this customer will pay off. And so instead, the approach, and this is what I talk about in the book, how companies are successful with it, is they don't do that at all. What they do is what I did in that presentation, which is I simply surface the metric. I cut customers down into quartiles. Here's your highest value customers will spend this amount, this big number. Your lowest value customers will spend this. And then I put a new column in that said, here's how much you're bidding on each. And it was all equal. And of course, somebody raises their hand. Wait a minute, if these customers are so valuable and these customers are not, why are we bidding the same amount? That seems ridiculous. And right then, this is how organizations bring other people along. You have to let people become educated to ask their questions, to build their own intuition about the subject. And this is why for a lot of companies in making this transition, their first step isn't to implement lifetime value and start bidding to it. It's to just allow lifetime value to become a metric in their reports, to allow other teams to see, yes, you may have acquired a lot of customers, but they're not spending. And then gradually companies and organizations start to make that change because they understand the importance and the power of this metric.
That's awesome. It still resonates because we see this all over the place. The expectations of the process is the other thing I wanted to ask you about. So
Sure.
on page 61 or so, one of the pages you mentioned, how long should you allocate for this process to evolve? And the benchmark you put down was about 180 days, which is about 6 months, give or take. But you've seen companies do it in very short amount of time as well. What's the guidance there? Like how, if a company is about to get started on this journey, how should they think about it, and how much resources and budget and time should they allocate?
In my opinion, is when it comes to these types of transformative projects, the death of most companies is a quarterly or annual planning process, because companies by default give themselves a whole quarter a year to implement it. And so I try to push back and I say most companies can really get this done in several weeks. That's to understand, to calculate, to model lifetime value, to start a simple test and putting it into action weeks. In the book, I recommend a couple of months, 180 days, because obviously you don't want to stress yourself out. There's more important things in life than metrics and data. But I want to give that room to say no more than 6 months, and ideally less than 3 months. But to say that this is achievable without saying 2022 or 2023 is going to be the year of us making this transition. It's no, March should be the year. It should be the month of this transition. April should be the month of the transition. A week in April, because it's possible. And it's only once I mentioned that people are like, really, we can do it. Yes, it should not take an entire quarter. It should not take an entire year. Certainly there's work that's going to be done over that entire year, but to get to those results, it shouldn't take that long.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. One of the chapters, chapter 8, is actually a really good chapter that I want to put a plug for, which is what does it take? It's really good because conversationally you start it off, and then like, here are the ingredients you need to go gather. Here's what you need to go build, and here's how you need to use it. Which I think is done really, really well. 6 minutes remaining. It might be a good idea to just go through these questions. And folks, let's go into our general Q&A. Maybe we'll do this real quick after. Do you want to do this now, or should we? I'm just very.
Here's what I would do. Because we have about 5 minutes left. What I would do is let's cover about the books for those people that have been patient hanging out. Let's go through as many questions as we can, and what we'll do is, for the questions we don't answer, so continue, send them into the Q&A. We'll provide a quick write-up, or maybe Emad, you and I will make a video for it. And if you have questions after you're reading the book to either of us, also remember we're both always available. You can contact Retina at any time. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. So keep those questions going. As much as we're interested in conversations between our businesses and customers, we're also interested in conversations with all of you. So that way we don't feel like we have to pack it all in 5 minutes.
I love it. I love it. So let's do the key takeaways. I read the book and I found these to be really the key compelling things. Asking questions and gathering the data. The more you do, the better you'll get an understanding. Identify the customers who matter. Don't treat all the customers the same, and building a culture that fosters experimentation and risk taking. What else would you add to this, Neil? I'm asking you to summarize your
here's how I summarize it. Every chapter in the book, and I think there's like 20 chapters of it, are meant to be built around one of those lessons. And I alluded to it early on that they're meant to be not something that, yes, it all builds in the same direction, but ones where you can literally open up the book, just look at chapter 8 or chapter 10 and take away something new that will change the way that you think about customer acquisition, that you think about experimentation or asking questions. It's designed to have that type of value. So when we talk about key takeaways from this, it's just that really this is a time to start and to have that conversation. And this is probably a great way to do it and to get all those best in class practices for you.
Yeah, that's well said. All right, let me give you guys a quick, so you'll shortly receive a text or an email for those who've stuck around for the whole webinar. We are going to be giving away a select number of books. I didn't realize how many people we would get, which is amazing that we have a lot of people who participated and joined the webinar. But we'll only have a certain number of books to give away, which we will. So you'll be receiving one of two things. If you're one of the lucky ones, you will get a notification from us asking you for your address so we could ship it over. And if you're not, then we'll send you a link to Amazon. Amazon is still running a amazing offer on this book.
Yeah, so Amazon's ridiculous. They're lower. They're lower than like the bulk rates that I was getting. It's like bulk rates are like, hey, if you order 50 books, you get someone that ships it to you. Amazon's now lower for that, but they don't coordinate with me and tell me, they just do it. One thing to mention too, I don't think we covered this, Emad. All the proceeds from this book are going to charity. So all the money made, it's supporting food pantries throughout the country. So there's no profit motive here. Amazon's the lowest price. In some words, you can actually get the book today, actually Kindle and audiobook. If you're not tired of listening to my voice, it's there. But just keep that in mind. Emad and his team were generous to buy a whole bunch of copies. So that money's going to get donated, but he'll hand those out. Encourage everyone to read it, to share about it, and come back and tell me your thoughts. Let's keep this conversation going.
Awesome. Why don't we take a minute or two to answer a couple of questions, and then we'll let folks go. Maybe we'll answer a couple. How about this one? Where does paid social fit in the LTV scale? Do these upper and mid funnel channels garner a high LTV given the role it plays in the marketing funnel, not always used for conversion?
The unsatisfying answer, it depends. It depends on how companies are using the channels. So generally the mix is, we see some patterns with some channels being under or overvalued in terms of driving customers. Paid search was identified as one that drives more. Every company, it's different. And the reason is that if I came to you and I said, this channel is bringing your best customers, you'd probably spend more on that channel. But then do you reach a saturation point, a point of diminishing returns where now you're reaching different audiences, different types of customers? And for that, that's just the importance of rerunning these lifetime value models and these analyses on a regular basis, because it's giving you a snapshot to say, this is what the world looks like, but our expectation isn't that it's consistent across companies or that it's static.
Yeah, that's great. All right, we have more questions, but do you want to take one more?
These are great questions. I'm looking through this. We're going to answer all these. These are fantastic.
All right. Do you want to do more, or should we do them in writing later on?
We will write them up. We will write them up, and we will send them to all of you. We want to be respectful of your time, but thank you so much for submitting them. We got questions before we got questions here. This is a conversation we all wanted to have.
I'm so excited about this. This was one of the most engaging webinars that we've done. So I'm really excited about all the audience participation we got. I want to give a big thank you to Neil, who graciously shared your time and wrote this book. Really, really appreciate it. And then a big thank you to the team who helped put the webinar together. And lastly, but not least, everybody who attended and participated. This is amazing. This is really fun and fantastic. Thank you so much, Neil. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thank you all of us out there for joining us as well. I hope to continue talking to a lot of you in the future.
All right. Have a good one, everyone. Take care.